It's 7 o'clock here in the UK. You're very welcome to spend your breakfast with us here at Sky News. There are two things on people's minds this morning. Questions over plans to relax self-isolation rules for those who've had 2 COVID vaccines, but not until later this summer. That amidst a warning of a potential big rise in cases. On the show today, the Business Secretary and the Shadow Foreign Secretary. Plus, can England keep the Euro dream alive when they meet Denmark at Wembley tonight? We'll be talking to fans and the Danish boss of Brentford FC.
Sweet Caroline, ba ba ba, these times never seem so good.
Well, as England fans dare to dream, I'll be speaking to the Wembley DJ, who'll be responsible for celebrating or maybe commiserating with England supporters tonight. We'll be asking him exactly what is on his playlist. And from pop stars to presidents, we'll be chatting to the man who's met some of the world's biggest celebrities in his quest for autographs. It is Wednesday, 7th of July. Pressure on the Prime Minister amidst predictions of a big rise in COVID cases over the summer and questions over self-isolation rules being dropped for some, but not quite yet. Fever pitch as England prepare for the semi-final against Denmark. Their manager says it's going to be a tight game.
It's a challenge for us. If we were a country that had won 5 titles and we had to match what had gone before, it might feel differently, but we're not.
COVID fake news. We speak to doctors who say there is no evidence that fertility will be harmed by vaccinations.
I stand for my principles. I think I'm just doing my work.
Gunned down. A crime journalist seriously injured after being shot in Amsterdam. Winter Olympic boycott. The calls for action over the 2022 event, if, that is, the United Nations is stopped from investigating alleged human rights abuses of the Uyghurs.
Good morning. Sunshine and showers again today, but I think we'll see more in the way of sunshine and less in the way of showers. So fewer showers and not quite as heavy for many. So a little bit more promising, perhaps. I'll bring you more details later on.
Morning all. There are 2 stories in town today. You might just have heard there's a big football match on tonight, and there are a lot of questions and concerns about the latest revelations on COVID freedoms. People who've had 2 vaccinations will have to wait until mid-August before the self-isolation rule is dropped for those who've come into close contact with someone who's tested positive. Many, however, are asking, why the wait? All this amidst a warning of a big rise in COVID cases, with some predicting that millions could catch COVID this summer. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, will be with us in just a couple of minutes. But before all that, millions are preparing to watch England play Denmark for a place in the Euros final. Manager Gareth Southgate says the game will be tight, but that they're motivated for the challenge. Sadia Chowdhury has our first report.
It's coming home! It's coming home! It's coming! Football's coming home!
What a journey it's been for fans of English football. It's England v Denmark in the Euro semi-final tonight, but who will clinch the win to reach the final?
I think it's got to be England. It's the first Euro semi-final in 25 years in front of a packed Wembley, rode on by 60,000 fans.
There's been plenty of discussion on redemption for Gareth Southgate after his penalty miss saw England go out in the most dramatic way at the same stage in 1996. But for many, the England boss is beyond that. He's just the second manager to take charge of England in a semi-final at both the Euros and the World Cup. The only other manager to do that was Sir Alf Ramsey in 1966 and 1968. Tonight's hopes rest on these men. Raheem Sterling has been England's standout player at the tournament, while Harry Kane is back among the goals at the right time.
It's a motivating thing. It's a challenge for us. If we were a country that had won 5 titles and we had to match what had gone before, it might feel differently, but we're not.
Despite soaring COVID rates in England, Wembley Stadium has an increased capacity of 60,000 fans for tonight's game. And they're predicting big numbers of their own.
England v Denmark, 3-1. Scorers? Harry Kane, Sterling.
Declan Rice.
Declan Rice, West Ham.
Declan Rice got 2.
2-1 to England. 2-1. 2-1.
The stakes are high for Alan Hansen. No, not that one. This one is the sales director at this Danish meat factory in Manchester, where he's massively outnumbered by his English staff.
We got the upper hand, albeit it's on Wembley. I think England will be under tremendous pressure playing in front of a 60,000 crowd.
They may be singing about going to Wembley here at this Danish school in London, but they'll have to stay up way past bedtime to see who gets to return on Sunday. With 7 consecutive clean sheets, it's England who are the favourites. A win tonight and they'll face Italy. They beat Spain in a penalty shootout in Wembley last night. Kick-off tonight is at 8. Until then, time will surely pass slowly. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
Well, as you can see, the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, joins us in the studio. Great to see you this morning. And, of course, we will be dwelling on England in just a moment. Sure. And, of course, the latest revelations on COVID. But you're making a fairly significant announcement, I have to say, today, in terms of life sciences. Tell us about it.
Absolutely right. Life sciences have been really at the forefront of our fight against COVID. And people know around the world that the UK is really a leader, a world leader in the life sciences. And today, we're launching the Life Sciences Vision, which is essentially a strategic look at how we can maximise great potential and our ability in this really crucial area. It's all about being able to get proper medicine, have high-level research, and critically commercialising that research, making great businesses out of really strong fundamental science.
Well, like any progress that can be made, particularly on cancer, dementia, anything like that, learning the successes from COVID-19, I think people will appreciate.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, we are now in a situation where we were listening to the Health Secretary yesterday. We could be seeing cases, new daily cases, in excess of 100,000 over the summer. I just want to dig down just a little bit deeper into what that might actually mean. If we're talking about cases of 100,000 a day, perhaps by the time we reach August, by the 16th of August, when the rules change on self-isolation, you could have over 1.5 million people self-isolating because they had a positive test. You could have probably double that, people that they've come into contact with, even people who've been double vaccinated, who would also be off work. Can we just have someone from the government concede there will be millions of people who will be isolating this summer as a result of the unlocking?
I don't think you can necessarily conclude that there'll be millions. We've always said...
significant.
We've always said that
significant number.
The numbers would be going up. But, of course, the critical thing, Niall, is what the hospitalisation rates and the fatalities as well. And the numbers we've seen on that have been much, much lower than anyone anticipated. And that's because of the success of the vaccination programme. And I think that's what's giving people protection. We've always said, we've always believed that infection rates might go up. But the critical point is what the effect of those infection rates is. And I think the vaccination double doses particularly give a measure of protection that we're happy with.
It will clearly, though, however, have an effect on business, which we'll talk about in just a second. But in addition, long COVID is clearly a thing. And if we're talking about 100,000 new cases a day, I mean, estimates vary, but a ballpark figure of 5,000 people a day acquiring long COVID or at some point in the future acquiring long COVID symptoms. I mean, that's not beyond the imagination, is it?
It's not beyond the imagination, but I think we've got to get... I think we're getting ahead of where we are, because what I speak to, what I hear, is that we can't simply lock down the society forever. We have to reopen. If we don't reopen fully on the 19th of July, the implications of that would be simply just to delay all of this till perhaps September and in the winter, where things would become more difficult. So it's a balancing act. We have to decide what to do, and I think this is the best course of action.
I mean, viewers will see that I have I've had a vaccine badge on this morning. My second jab was yesterday, which it explains in part why I'm a little bit grumpier this morning than usual. But why, if we're going to open up the country in July, why are people like me going to have to wait until August to avoid self-isolating if I come into contact like this, at this distance from someone who's COVID-19 positive?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's always a balance. So people on the one hand are saying that the 19th of July is too soon for general reopening, and other people are saying that it's not soon enough. In the case of self-isolation, we feel that it does, delaying it for 4 weeks, does give a measure of protection. It allows more and more people to be jabbed. And we think that that's a precaution that's worth taking.
But we're opening up hospitality. People will be in pubs, bars, restaurants, potentially without wearing their masks. We understand, of course, that the hospitality sector, 16 to 34-year-olds make up 60% of the workforce, and none of them, well, very few of them, will be double vaccinated, even by the middle of August. Do you accept the fact that the hospitality industry is going to be hit incredibly hard if hundreds of thousands, even millions of people are going to be self-isolated as a result of us opening up, perhaps, in the view of some, just a little bit too early?
I think we're making all sorts of assumptions here.
Well, we've got to.
We've got to make some...
You're modelling, we're modelling.
Yeah, we've got to make... But you're always looking at the worst possible case. My own view about the hospitality sector is that they were very, very keen to reopen. If you speak to pub owners, if you speak to people in the hospitality business, they were very disappointed that we didn't open up on the 21st of June. And I think many of them, the majority, would say that this is the right precaution to be taking. They're very happy.
I think they were all very happy because they assumed that come July the 19th, people who were double vaccinated would be able to avoid self-isolating. I mean, obviously, you're the business secretary, you know a fair amount about business, but, you know, Julian Metcalf, you know, the founder of Itsu, the founder of Pret a Manger, I mean, he's described this strategy, and I quote, as completely and utterly mental.
Well, you can't have it both ways. On the one hand, we're saying that we want to reopen, but we're giving a measure of precaution in terms of delaying lifting the self-isolation restrictions. It's a balance. It's not a perfect solution, but on the one hand, we're saying that we can reopen, and on the other hand, we're saying that we want to give a little bit more protection in terms of the self-isolation rules.
Sure, but it's not even just people in business that are saying this, and the head of the Hospitality UK has made similar comments to Mr Metcalf. I mean, Ian Duncan-Smith makes the point, look, why go into a pub where people are not still adhering to the rule of 6, you know, where there's no social distancing? Because in all likelihood, if you go to the pub more than a couple of times a week, you will get pinged at some point, and you will have to isolate.
So the big thing here is that we need to rely on people's judgment. There's common sense and a degree of individual responsibility. That's always going to be, ultimately, what we have to rely on. And in this instance, we've said we're going to reopen. People will be allowed not to wear masks, to do what they choose. But also, the businesses themselves will be conducting business in a responsible way. I think this is perfectly reasonable.
Just in terms, though, of who might well be affected, I mean, we understand, of course, the younger you are, the less likely it is that you've had a vaccine, certainly be double vaccinated. Isn't it the case? I mean, you don't accept the figure of several million people isolating. Others have suggested it's fairly standard. But that means the infection will be running through young people, won't it? Once again, the youngest in our society, those that have lost, frankly, from certain perspectives, the most in all of this, will once again have to suffer. Tell me that this isn't, you know, herd immunity by another name.
So, again, as I always say, there's a balance. When this awful illness struck, it was very apparent that certain groups were much more vulnerable than others. In the case of COVID, it was older people. That's why the vaccination rollout happened the way it did. We targeted older, more vulnerable people. And the medical view was that younger people had more protection than more vulnerable groups. Clearly, we're looking at vaccinating younger people. We're looking at what JCVI are going to say. But we feel that, on balance, the best approach is to try and get our kids back into school and get them back into normal life.
Where do you personally sit on the idea of vaccinating, 12 years and above?
Well, I don't know what the medical opinion is. I would definitely defer to the JCVI on that, and they're going to make their ruling or their judgment public very soon.
Do you not, though, have any concern? There's no one in government around the cabinet table expressing concern. You think back to late last year, cases were nowhere near 100,000 a day. But infection was running rampant in parts of the country. In Kent, for example, and a variant of concern emerged. I mean, if we're talking about running higher than at the highest point, in the January peak in terms of cases, there is a real risk, isn't there, that we're just, playing a waiting game until another domestically produced, perhaps even more resistant to vaccine variant emerges.
So, again, as I always say, there's a balance, but the critical difference between this time and late last year has, of course, been the vaccine rollout. We've had 75 million doses. We've had 2/3 of the population certainly getting the first dose. And that's a completely different scenario than was the case last year.
Just to stick with businesses, and of course, plenty of people have been challenging the government on the removal of the mandatory wearing of masks. Where do you sit in that? I mean, in what circumstances will you be wearing a mask?
So I've always said that I believe in individual responsibility. I think businesses have their own discretion, their own judgment. I think individuals should also use their own judgment. Personally, I use the tube a lot in London. And I would probably wear a mask in that context, in the tube, in public transport. That's a personal view. It's not something that I would mandate or necessarily dictate to other people.
But you'd be quite happy for businesses, say airlines, hospitality sector, to continue to require people wearing a mask inside their premises?
Yes, I mean, actually, before COVID, it was very interesting that businesses have always had the ability to prescribe certain health, or they've always had that. And I think we're going back to that situation. People have forgotten that actually businesses did have some discretion in terms of what people could wear.
But the thing that people have always struggled with this is that the wearing of masks, there's a degree to which it's a prophylactic measure that you're looking after yourself, but it is in essence about looking after others.
True.
I mean, if you are someone who, say, has leukemia, you're immunosuppressed, you're sitting on public transport, do you think that they have a right to demand that other people wear masks when they're on public transport?
So if we wind the clock back to pre-COVID, we had people who were immunosuppressed, we had flu. And what would happen in those days was that they would take the advice from their doctors, they'd take medical advice. And I think I'd expect that to continue post-COVID.
One quick question just before you go. Of course, the football on tonight. I will be not necessarily supporting with full voice, but I'll certainly be cheering a little bit from the sidelines. How do you think it's going to go?
I think England will win. We haven't conceded a goal yet. I think it's a pretty remarkable.
We've got Scotland to
I don't want to jinx anything. Government ministers predicting football games probably isn't the best thing for us to do. But I think on form, if you look at what's happened, I think England have got a really good chance, and I hope they can actually convert their brilliant performances into a victory tonight.
We will soon find out, won't we? Kwasi Kwarteng.
Thank you.
Good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. Still to come on the show this morning, appropriately enough, Willow the cockerpoo has correctly predicted England's results at Euro 2020, as well as other major events. We'll hear what she's forecasting for tonight's match at 7:50, see whether or not the Minister got it right. Tony Perry is the Wembley DJ who will either commiserate or celebrate with England fans tonight. He'll be running us through his playlist at 9:15. And we'll get a diplomatic prediction of the score from tonight's semi-final at 9:20, when we're joined by the Danish ambassador to the UK, Lars Thusen. But now, one of Holland's most respected crime journalists is fighting for his life after he was shot in the middle of Amsterdam. Our reporter Aisha Zahid is at the newsroom for us. Aisha, tell us more.
Well, a brutal attack. Police say that they've made several arrests. 3 people arrested in total, 2 found in a car and 1 arrested in the city. After the attack took place, and Peter R. de Vries was left seriously wounded. Now, the attack took place near a large public area in central Amsterdam. It happened just after he left a TV studio where he was filming a regular guest appearance. Now, the 64-year-old crime journalist is a prominent figure in the Netherlands. He's known for his investigative work and his TV shows, as well as his extensive reporting on the criminal underworld in the Netherlands. It's something he has in the past received threats for. and needed police protection for as well. And it was long feared he'd become victim to one of the criminals that he had reported on. So police will be continuing their investigations to determine what happened yesterday and who is responsible. And they've confirmed that Peter R. de Vries remains in hospital fighting for his life.
Thank you. Well, let's take a look at the latest coronavirus figures for the UK now. There were 28,773 new COVID cases, 37 more deaths were reported. That's the highest number since the end of March. Now, that means the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test now stands at 128,358. The latest vaccination figures show another 76,962 people received their first jab. 147,814 had their second. So that means in total, 33.8 million people have now received both doses of a COVID vaccine. However, there are fears that some false claims linking fertility issues to COVID vaccinations online could be putting women off having them. Sky's Kate McCann has the detail.
While science has moved fast in the pandemic, so has misinformation, and the vaccine has often been the target. Experts warn fears about fertility are causing women to refuse the jab. News that over 13,000 have reported changes to their periods since being vaccinated have fueled those concerns.
For these vaccines, we have quite a lot of evidence that they don't reduce your chances of getting pregnant. So in the clinical trials, people were asked not to become pregnant, but nonetheless, 65 people became pregnant by accident. And they became pregnant equally in the vaccinated and the unvaccinated group, which tells us that the vaccine isn't reducing people's chances of getting pregnant.
What would you say to a woman, maybe thinking about having a family, wants to get pregnant, hasn't had the vaccine yet, and is really worried about hearing these reports about people's periods changing, worried about fertility? What would you say to her today?
We know that sex hormones affect the immune system and the immune system affects sex hormones. And actually one quite good example of this is that we have some evidence that the flu vaccine, given at a certain time in your cycle, can slightly dampen the amount of progesterone you have. And it's the balance between estrogen and progesterone that builds up and breaks down the lining of your uterus. So if these get slightly out of whack, then we might expect to get a heavier period or a later period.
When you look at some of these Facebook groups, it gets really dark really quickly. In fact, not getting the vaccine when pregnant or trying for a baby could, doctors warn, do more harm.
So there's no evidence that the vaccine affects long-term fertility. Could the vaccine, if the vaccine makes periods irregular for a month or two, could it make it a bit more difficult to fall pregnant in that month or two? Well, theoretically possible. Maybe you wouldn't ovulate, release an egg in that month. But is that a reason not to have the vaccine? I don't think so, because bear in mind that if you're pregnant and you get COVID infection, it tends to be a bit worse on average for both mother and baby.
Anything that stops people from coming forward to vaccination centres like this one to get their jab is a problem for all of us, because the government is relying on high levels of immunity across the country to move away from restrictions and into normal life again. And to do that, they need to get people to feel happy and safe to come forward to get their jab. Vaccine hesitancy is right at the top of the government's agenda as ministers prepare to unlock society. They're relying on it to protect normal life, but it can only work once it's in our arms. Kate McCann, Sky News.
Some of the other news this morning. A coronavirus lockdown in Australia's biggest city is to be extended for another week. Restrictions will remain across Sydney because of the number of cases of the Delta variant. The government claims that thousands of potential new coronavirus infections have been prevented after a mass testing programme in Liverpool. The scheme, which ran between November and April, saw more than half the city's population take a test. Senior Republican Party officials say no data was lost during a major ransomware attack. The White House says it was one of the largest international hacks ever attempted, with 17 countries affected.
काश गुजरता हुआ वक्त ठहर जाए ये बादल यूं ही गरजते रहें ये बिजलियां यूं ही चमकती रहें और ये रात फैलकर हमारी सारी जिंदगी पर छा जाए.
One of India's best-known actors, Dilip Kumar, has died at the age of 98. He'd been acting since the 1940s and was known as the Tragedy King for playing numerous serious roles. The Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, described him as a cinematic legend. That's a story. Brown trout can become addicted to methamphetamine, according to scientists. A team at the Czech University of Life Sciences say the fish are affected as illegal drugs make their way from domestic water supplies into rivers. More on that as we get it. Now, there's a call for Britain to prepare for a boycott of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics if, that is, China blocks a UN investigation into alleged abuses of Uyghur people. Let's speak now to our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire. Morning, Tom. I mean, you've done an awful lot of work on this over the past couple of years, and it's pretty clear the Chinese state has something of an unhealthy relationship with its Uyghur population.
Yeah, I mean, there are allegations. We've been to Xinjiang on numerous occasions to look into these allegations. There is potential evidence for what the US and the UK say are massive human rights abuses, and that is, of course, something that China denies. And as a result of that, there has been growing pressure to boycott the Olympics, going to be held here in Beijing early next year, while China is carrying out these policies. And today, the Labour Party are saying that actually no British royals or ministers or officials should go to the Olympics while those abuses are happening, while China is not allowing that investigation. They say if an investigation isn't allowed before September, that this should be the case. They're not saying athletes shouldn't go, by the way. They're just saying that officials shouldn't go. So the question is China going to have an investigation? You might remember the last time China allowed an investigation was the World Health Organization coming here to look into the origins of COVID-19, and their report was roundly discredited, including by the head of the World Health Organization. So that idea of getting access to Xinjiang, to looking at the detention facilities there, huge sprawling detention facilities, and seeing what's happening inside is pretty unlikely before the end of the year. The question, of course, is what reaction the Chinese will have to this statement. They don't like it when people, as they say, interfere in their own internal affairs. And we've seen in the US, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, has led similar calls. She was called despicable by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So I think we can anticipate a similar sort of reaction from Beijing today to this proposal from the Labour Party.
Tom, many thanks. Time for us to check in and see how the weather is looking today as we head towards the semi-final. Another interested party. Kirsty is at the wall with the details. Go on, Kirsty, tell me, is the sun going to be shining on England at Wembley tonight?
Well, it will for a time, yes. There's some showers around, though, this evening, but the showers will fade, so by the end of the match, it should be a little bit drier, but then also, given it's evening, getting darker too. Let's take a look at the weather, shall we?
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. For many of us, the weather is a little bit quieter over the next few days. We've got more in the way of sunshine, less in the way of showers, but we do still have some showers around. So fewer showers, not quite as heavy, but still some to watch out for. Rather grey start in the south. We'll see the cloud breaking as the day goes on. Further north across Scotland, though, that cloud may prove a little bit more stubborn. Now, the showers today will be hit and miss. Not as many as recent days, but central and eastern areas could still pick up some heavy ones, especially parts of eastern England, eastern Scotland could still see a rumble of thunder, maybe even some hail and gusty winds. In the sunshine, though, we're looking at temperatures into the high teens, low 20s, 22, not out of the question. And the showers that do develop today will tend to fade away as we go into the evening. Now, across the far north of Scotland, it does stay rather grey here, and we've got more clouds spilling in across parts of Northern Ireland and the Republic, but otherwise a fairly dry night with clear spells and temperatures staying in double digits. The outlook for Thursday, well, fewer showers yet again. Bit more cloud out to the north and west, but there will be some brighter spells and it should be largely dry. Greatest chance of seeing some showers will be across southern and eastern parts of England, and maybe the odd sharp shower. Bit warmer though, temperatures up to 23 Celsius.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Kirsty, thanks very much. Senior members of the royal family have been getting involved in the Euro 2020 hype. Let's have a look. You recognise that? Well, at the request of the Prince of Wales, the band of the Coldstream Guards played a series of football anthems. COVID restrictions mean that crowds weren't able to gather, so instead the Guards played Three Lions and Sweet Caroline in the gardens of Clarence House for the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. Which version do you prefer there? Just a couple of the England fans that are preparing for tonight's match. Supporters are expected to buy, get this, more than 50,000 pints a minute during tonight's semi-final. The British Beer and Pub Association estimates that just under 7 million drinks will be ordered throughout the game. One hopes because you're celebrating and not drowning your sorrows. Still to come, we'll be talking to the Association of School and College Leaders. They claim the government is trying to blame teachers for the large number of pupils being sent home to isolate. That's coming up after this.
What this Iceland study shows is that, not only is a 4-day working week with no reduction in pay good for workers in terms of better mental health, better well-being, it's also good for the employer through greater productivity, which we'd already started to see with increasing amount of companies now trialling a 4-day week across the world, from Unilever in New Zealand, Microsoft in Japan. But this was one of the biggest studies of its kind, which has led to now 86% of Iceland's population reducing their working hours. And it shows that it can be done. The 9-to-5, 5-day working week, we do not need to keep with that anymore. That is a very outdated model of work from the 1930s, where it's been implemented and trialled. Lots of researchers have been doing the analysis as they go, interviewing staff along the way to see how they're managing to cope with their workload over, say a 6-month trial. And 9 times out of 10, productivity is going up or staying the same. And that's not surprising. If we're burnt out, overworked and stressed, we're not going to do a very good job. Whereas if we have a bit more time for ourselves to rest, then we're going to come back in on a Monday morning much more motivated to perform better in our jobs. This is a policy that is, good for the environment, good for workers and good for the economy. Polling shows that the majority of people would like to have Fridays off, which is no surprise. The idea of a free weekend is very, very popular, 3-day weekend. But in all, we wouldn't be able to do that in all cases. So yes, for a lot of firms, we would just be able to shut the office on a Friday, for example, and everyone just has an extra day off. But we need flexibility built into the implementation of a 4-day week. And so there'll be various different ways of doing it. Some firms, for example, a big social media organization in the US, most of their staff have Fridays off, but they have a customer-facing team who take a different day off each week and swap it around. So there's different ways of implementing it, and where flexibility is built into the system, it seems to work best.
We are at a breaking point, and we need to work now and fast.
Even though young people are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, young people can also become the change agents that we need to address the climate impact. In my campaign or in my advocacy work, I work largely with young people so that their voices can be heard, so they can also influence decision making from the local level to the national level. And thankfully, we are making progress in that regard.
Welcome back. You can't have it both ways. That's the warning from the government this morning as they face criticism for changing the rules on self-isolation for adults. It will now be August the 16th before fully vaccinated people in England will avoid self-isolation if they come into close contact with someone testing positive for COVID-19. But businesses say it will hold back the recovery, a point I put to the Business Secretary just a short time ago. Julian Metcalf, the founder of Itsu, the founder of Pret a Manger, he's described this strategy, and I quote, as completely and utterly mental.
Well, you can't have it both ways. On the one hand, we're saying that we want to reopen, but we're giving a measure of precaution in terms of delaying lifting the self-isolation restrictions. It's a balance. It's not a perfect solution, but on the one hand, we're saying that we can reopen, and on the other hand, we're saying that we want to give a little bit more protection in terms of the self-isolation rules. In this instance, we've said we're going to reopen. People will be allowed not to wear masks, to do what they choose. but also the businesses themselves will be conducting business in a responsible way. I think this is perfectly reasonable.
Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, is here with her view on all of that. And I suspect there'll be plenty of people, TC, who have a view on whether or not the Business Secretary might be, I don't know, slightly more sympathetic towards business.
Yes, the Business Secretary was very unapologetic about the fact that the date that people who've had 2 jabs will no longer have to self-isolate, the whole system of being pinged and having to stay at home for 10 days, that date was a lot later than people expected, because you've got the easing of restrictions on the 19th of July, and that doesn't end for another 4 weeks. Now, he told you we couldn't necessarily say it will be millions of people self-isolating by then during, of course, the holiday or perhaps staycation season. But if, according to an analysis today, for every person who's off, another 2 are self-isolating, if we get to 100,000 cases, as the government say we might well do, then that does quickly run into the millions. And the government seem to want to say, look, this is what we have to do. If we want to open up now, these are the consequences. But for a lot of people, that's going to be a bit of a miserable summer.
Certainly will be. TC, thanks very much indeed. Now, a town in County Durham will be celebrating its unique position in tonight's Euro 2020 semi-final. Both goalkeepers, England's Jordan Pickford and Denmark's Kasper Schmeichel, have both played for Darlington FC, currently in the National League. Guess where we're heading? Our correspondent Fraser Maud is joining us from Darlington this morning, where I suspect things are already at fever pitch.
Not quite just yet, but they will be in the next hour or so when the children start arriving here at Mowden Junior School. We're about 3 or 4 miles away from Darlington FC's ground, where, as you say, Kasper Schmeichel and Jordan Pickford both made their professional debuts. Kasper Schmeichel back in 2006, out on loan from Manchester City. Jordan Pickford in 2012, out on loan from his club, Sunderland. Obviously, they both went on to great careers, both domestically and internationally, and there'll be a lot of people rooting for, hopefully, Jordan Pickford more than Kasper Schmeichel this evening. I can have a quick chat with the head teacher here, Pete King. What are the children like? How excited are they getting about the match tonight?
Really excited. I've been in quite a few classes this week. The older children are very aware of it, as you'd imagine. I spent some time in one of the younger classes, some 6-year-olds, year 1, a couple of days ago, and you'd be amazed how many knew the result from the weekend, the scorers, that kind of thing. It's a shame we can't meet in the hall and have whole school assemblies, but the awareness is definitely there. Yeah, the excitement's building for today, for sure.
So they're getting excited for later on?
Yes, yeah, and we've got some children coming in a bit, then you guys are here, it's all adding to it, so yeah, very excited.
Fantastic. Well, we'll be back with a few of the children later on this morning to see just how excited they are, but in the meantime, hand back to you from here in Darlington, the home of the international goalkeeper.
Fraser, thanks very much indeed. And as Fraser says, we will be back in Darlow a little later on when the kids pitch up at primary. Now, teaching unions have welcomed the government's plans to ease the system of bubbles, which has forced thousands of children to isolate and miss classes. But they're worried about what the government's plans are when schools return from the summer holidays. Joining us now, the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders, Jeff Barton. Jeff, good to see you again. I wonder what your reaction is, of course, to the relaxation on the bubble rule. A little bit too late, I would suspect.
Well, it's difficult to know, I think, Neil. I mean, you look at that school in Darlington and you've got those young people not able to have a school assembly alongside 60,000 fans going to watch the football last night. I mean, with 640,000 young people off school last week, I mean, that's the government's figures, not because they've got COVID, some might have, but because they might have come into contact. The bubble system simply isn't sustainable. So we welcome the fact that that's being dismantled. It's important to say it's not being dismantled yet, and parents will have to kind of stick with it through till July the 19th. But at least the end is nigh with all of that, which then leads us to think, so what might September look like? And that's where we've probably got more questions, as you imply.
Yeah, well, tell me, what are those questions about September? I mean, clearly, the one thing that you want to try and ensure is that pupils maximise their time in a classroom with a teacher, with a teaching assistant, getting face-to-face learning.
That's exactly right. So one of the things that the government told us yesterday is that they want to have that regime of testing at the beginning of term in secondary. So in other words, young people will not be able to set foot into a classroom until they've done a lateral flow test. That immediately means that what you're going to have at the beginning of September is a staggered return to young people, because each of them has to do the test, has to wait half an hour for the result, etc. So we're not immediately going to be back into the normality of school life. And I think quite a lot of people, given what we've been through so far, where there's been face covering, social distancing, bubbles, staggered starts, staggered lunchtimes, extra ventilation, which bits of that do we definitely need to keep? For example, the whole face coverings thing, I personally loathe them. But a lot of people recognise that they are one way that you demonstrate how you're looking after other people. And the thing, Neil, which is distinctive about a school, of course, is if you're an adult working in a school, whether you're the secretary, whether you're a teacher, you are surrounded by large groups of people who will not have been vaccinated in September. The adults will have been, but young people won't. And I think those measures which just build reassurance, both for the staff in the school, for the young people in the school, but also for the parents sending their children back to school, would just give an extra sense of reassurance that it isn't all or nothing, which I think today, for some of us, it feels a bit too much like.
Yeah, and of course, it's not just masks. The requirement to keep socially distanced has dropped as well. I mean, what is your view? Obviously, you speak on behalf of your members, but you don't speak on behalf of individual schools. I mean, what is your view? Do you think that there will be educational establishments up and down the country who choose simply to maintain the rules as they were before they were dropped?
I think the majority are going to try to default back to the kind of normality that we used to have, so that the art block is used for art rather than putting all of year 8 there without them being able to move across the school. Now, that's been one of the patterns of secondary schools. So I think there will be a sense of trying to get back to normality. I think we might see some schools holding on to some of the things we've learned through the pandemic. For example, I think we might still have staggered lunchtimes, not because it's a health risk, but actually it's created a calmer environment and shorter queues. I think we might see parents' evenings being done differently in the future. I think there will be some things which have changed, but I think the most important first step will be the reassurance to parents, both of what their responsibility is in the testing, the fact that Test and Trace, the NHS programme costing £37 billion, is finally going to take responsibility for public health in schools and colleges. That's a good thing. But also the reassurance about whether extra ventilation and some other measures might be needed in order that we, educationists, can focus on the most important thing, education.
Jeff, do you have any confidence that by the end of term, that will be the end of the major disruption that pupils will face in their education?
Well, by the end of this term, I mean, if we continue at the rate that we're going at the moment, 640,000 young people not in school, and almost half as many again also not in school. This is the big untold story, I think. Not because they've been told to self-isolate, they've simply disappeared. It's almost as if parents are voting with their feet. If you look at the beaches of Cornwall, that might give us some indication of where those young people are at the moment. So there's something about this term I think we just have to grit our teeth and get through as best we can. I think all of our priorities now need to go into making as normal as possible school and college life for all those young people who, as we're seeing today, on average have lost a third of a year of their teaching over the past year.
Yeah, and it's not as if their school years aren't stressful enough to start with. Jeff Barton, great to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, as the vaccine programme reaches the final people to get their first jabs, the government is still considering plans to make jags mandatory for some health and social care workers. A number of companies in Britain and the United States say they're also considering the idea for their employees. Well, we can talk now to Melinda Mills, Professor of Demography, who sits on the SAGE Group for Behavioural Insights. Professor, great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being with us. Well, let's just start with that, shall we? What is your view in terms of vaccination, in terms of the way in which people will behave as we move forward? I mean, just a general question. Has the vaccine uptake been where you want it to be?
Yeah, so if we look at it, within the UK, there's actually been a very high uptake. We have a large proportion of the population being vaccinated, but we still need to get groups out, so people to get their second jabs. And also, it's uneven across different areas across the UK, but also across different socio-demographic groups. And it's really related to a few things. So I think people are increasingly confident about the safety. Those concerns were large at the beginning, but I think a lot of people can now see these are very safe. And as well, I think the big problem now, our biggest fear will be complacency, that people will think, oh, do I really need to get it? And also the the other one is convenience, of course, too. So it has to be available for people to get it. And, there's been various incentives around the world that have been introduced to try to not make it mandatory, but to give people incentives. So things such as in the US. Oh, go ahead.
No, please finish.
Yeah, so incentives such as in the US, for example, I mean, they've offered things from lotteries to university scholarships for children from 12 to 17. They've offered beers, guns, my favorite, childcare, to try to incite people and say, would you please get vaccinated? In California, the first 2 million people were given gift cards, for example. So there's lots of different kinds of levers and incentives you can offer people rather than making them mandatory.
Yeah, I have to hope that they weren't handing out the beers and the guns at the same time in America. But just in terms of that which you said a moment ago, I'm no behavioural scientist. You're the person with the insight into all of this. But with the announcement of the relaxation on July the 19th, many of the restrictions going, can we just automatically assume that will have a negative impact on vaccine uptake?
No, I don't think we can immediately think, people will be less likely to be vaccinated. I think it could even have the opposite effect, that people will be thinking, okay, I'm more likely to be exposed. I think the real issue we'll have here is inequality in who has been able to be vaccinated. So as things open up, we have restaurants, we have sporting events, all of these different things. The staff that often works in these places are young, and they'll have the opportunity only to have the first vaccination, and the second one will come, as late as September. So they won't be fully protected, and they'll actually be quite exposed. And then we'll come into questions which you were talking about in relation. They could be asking their employees, isn't it your duty of care to protect me? So some people, particularly younger ones that haven't had the opportunity to be fully vaccinated during this in-between period, could really have some concerns about their own protection.
They certainly could. Professor Mills, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, New York City has seen unusually un-summer-like weather. Thunderstorms and heavy winds caused, well, as you can see, plenty of damage across the city overnight. Debris spotted hundreds of feet flying in the air, flying past the city's high-rise buildings. Now, a heatwave in Pakistan means that the country is seeing some of the highest temperatures ever seen. The city of Jacobabad saw some of the most extreme conditions, with temperatures of 52 degrees Celsius. That's 126 degrees Fahrenheit. The chief meteorologist at R&D Islamabad, Syed Mushtaq Ali Shah, joins us now from Pakistan. Syed, great to have you on the programme this morning, and I do hope you're keeping cool. Temperatures of 52 degrees Celsius. Have you ever seen anything like it?
Hello.
Syed, can you hear me, Syed?
Yes, Pakistan faced a worst heat wave of a few years this summer. It was from June 7 to 9, and especially it was more intense in this north and northwestern parts of Pakistan, where temperature was more than around 6 to 8 degrees, more than normal degrees Celsius. And we have many events during these periods for the disastrous event, in which one was in northern Pakistan, where there was a glacier surge, and due to this surge, a new lake has formed, which is very much dangerous for the people living below this area. And we are continuously monitoring this glacier surge. And other impacts were some these fruit orchards. It was very unfortunate that fruit orchards of oranges and apples and some more fruits completely dried away during this period. And other impacts were very low because Pakistan Meteorological Departments have had a warning, a timely warning to the communities of these areas, So at least we are fortunate that there was no casualties during this period.
Sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, but just tell us, how are people managing to survive in temperatures as high as 52 degrees Celsius? Presumably, people just simply aren't leaving the house.
Actually, this is not new for Pakistan. And if you continuously monitor it, you will see that every year we face these 2 or 3 heat waves every year, especially in May and the month of May and June. So maximum people of these areas are born timely and they make their own arrangements for their safety and to avoid such incidents. So that's why in Pakistan, human loss during these heat waves is very less.
Syed Mushtaq Ali Shah, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much, and do stay as cool as you can and look after yourself in those temperatures. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Appropriately enough, time for the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Temperatures here are around about average at the moment, so low 20s really is where we're peaking in the summer sunshine, and there will be a bit more sunshine to come over the next few days. There are still showers around, but not as many as we've seen. So the showers today, mainly in the south, where it's a bit cloudy to start the day, and also across parts of northern and eastern Scotland. Most of the cloud breaking up through the day, but I think the far north of Scotland staying rather grey. The shower risk greatest across central and eastern parts of Britain, so a few thundery downpours to watch out for, and temperatures into the low 20s.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's head back to the Euro, shall we? And to predict the score of tonight's England-Denmark match, some fans, studied both sides' form, analysing thousands of statistics. On this programme, however, we prefer something rather different. Willow, the cockerpoo, has so far correctly predicted all but one of England's matches in the tournament. And I'm very pleased to say, joining us now on the show, the mystic cockapoo Willow and her owner, Charlotte Price. Charlotte, good to see you this morning. We'll talk about the results in just a second. But when did you first recognise that you possessed a psychic puppy?
It was definitely, I think, a little by accident. Willow's always kind of been able to choose between 2 things. So if you hold 2 things up in front of her, she'll choose them. And it turns out she can choose the winner. So, yeah, just a little bit by accident. But so far, she's doing quite well with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one for gambling on the football, but I've occasionally put a couple of bets on political events, and I'm told that Willow has actually correctly called presidential elections in the past.
So, yeah, we held up a picture just with the word Trump on and a picture just with the word Biden on and said, who are you backing, Willow? And her paw straight for the correct one.
Well, I have to then ask the big question of the day. England, Denmark. OK, what's the result going to be? Go on, tell us.
So we don't have a number on the scoreline, but Willow definitely chose England for the win.
And do you know, was she barking furiously? Was it just a little growl? I just want to know how much money I should be sticking on this tonight as a result of your cockapoo.
I'm not suggesting anyone goes and sticks their mortgages on Willow's predictions. However, like we said, she's on a roll. She was pretty confident, and she's woke up this morning with a spring in her step. So yeah, I'd feel pretty confident if you popped a little bit of money on. Would you?
But she doesn't say very much, I have to say. It's one of the calmest dogs we've ever had on this particular programme. I mean, is there anything that she might be able to take these skills to use in the future? You know, we talked about political betting or anything like that. I mean, she could work with scientists on climate change, maybe some kind of research, anything like that you think might be useful?
I mean, anything is possible, isn't it? She has been helping me do a little bit of online teaching through the pandemic, so she can spell a name, do her numbers, do her shapes. So yeah, never say never. She definitely is a bit of a wonder pooch.
I've got to ask, obviously I can see the St George's flag behind you, the 3 lions on her underbelly, I think it's probably the way to put it. Does she support any other teams? I mean, do you think you might be able to get her into a Scotland shirt anytime?
I think she definitely goes with her little patriotic heart when she's making these predictions. So I'm not sure a Scotland shirt, but you never know.
Yeah, my psychic Highland Terrier proved absolutely useless during the Euro 2020 campaign for Scotland this year. Just a final word, though, Charlotte. How will you guys be watching?
So we'll be watching at home tonight. We've watched a couple in the pub, a couple at home, but with it being near Willow's bedtime, we're going to watch at home tonight.
Well, look, I will keep fingers crossed that the pup has the result right. Charlotte, Willow, thank you both very much for being with us and good luck tonight.
Thank you for having us. Take care.